Okay, Samarajan, I think you're all ready. We can get it started.
Perfect. Welcome everyone to our fourth session on the abolition. Welcome everyone to our fourth session on the abolition of the death penalty. This is one of 10 sessions offered. We're just going to take a couple minutes and allow others to join us. But while we're doing that, I just want to let you know that this session will focus on the death penalty and political violence. These sessions are provided in collaboration with Amnesty International Canada, Carleton University's Youth and Justice Lab, the Human Rights Research and Education Centre, the Canadian International Council, Saskatchewan branch, the Mardum Foundation, and the Payvand Society. Politics and violence are intertwined concepts. On the one hand, the polis, or the political realm, is created to ideally eliminate, or at its very least, limit the instances of violence. On the other hand, the majority of legal and political systems are typically born out of violence. Capital punishment is a manifestation of the abuse of political power for purposes of example, manufacturing an economy of fear and death and maintaining control over the populace. This sanction takes various forms, ranging from public execution to assassination. This session will explore the use of lethal force by the state in its various forms as an instance of political violence. And before we go on to our panelists, I just want to give a little bit of an anecdote, a little story here, because we are in Canada and some of our panelists will be focusing on political violence within the Islamic Republic of Iran. I just wanted to talk about the case of Zahra Kazemi. This was the photojournalist, Iranian-Canadian photojournalist that was killed by the Iranian regime back in 2003. And you can see her photo here. I have her photo in my studio. Zahra Kazemi was one of the reasons I wanted to become a journalist, one of the reasons I went into journalism. She was kidnapped and abducted by the regime on June 27th and subjected to 72 hours of brutal rape and torture, to which she finally succumbed to on July 3rd. She died 2003. Now, as usual, Iran lied about what it had done to her. And I just want to show you, because this was the first Iranian Canadian killed by the Iranian regime. Of course, we know that she wasn't going to be the last, but I did keep some of these clippings over the past 22 years. And just to show that this had a major effect on the Iranian community here in Canada. And here's another one. You can see this is the cover of the Globe and Mail. And it really speaks to the justice that her family, specifically her son, Stefan Hashemi, tried to get for his mother. For more than 15 years, he went through Canada's court systems, trying to be able to take the Islamic Republic to court and to hold them to account. But ultimately, Canada's Supreme Court said that because of political immunity, he could not hold the Islamic Republic to account. Now, luckily, the Canadian government has done away with this immunity law, and you can today hold governments to account for torture, state-sanctioned torture or killing. That is done somewhere else. So I just wanted to share that little bit of a story with all of our listeners today. Our first panelist today is Hilary Holmes. Hilary is a longtime human rights activist who currently works for Amnesty International Canada as a crisis and tactical campaigner. As a young leader, they developed youth participation and leadership development programs at the national and international level before shifting to strategic campaigning. Over the years, they have focused on a wide range of thematic and country-based files, including children affected by armed conflict, the arms trade, international justice, the human rights impact of national security measures, and mass surveillance. Hilary, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Samira. The death penalty is not the only means by which the state uses violence to intentionally kill people. While executions are precise in the sense that only the person sentenced to death is killed in that moment, other tactics deployed by the state, as well as armed groups, vary considerably in their precision. Death in detention, enforced disappearances, extrajudicial executions and targeted killings, excessive force while cracking down on public protests. The net widens out from specific individuals to whoever is with them in the car, in the building, or the marketplace hit by the drone, the indiscriminate firing of tear gas or other chemical agents, or the use of live ammunition at a demonstration. And often that's the point, to stoke fear and emphasize the ultimate price that will be paid for dissent and opposition. And in all cases, these killings are at the very least human rights violations, and in some cases amount to war crimes, crimes against humanity, or more. So I'm going to provide an overview of these ways in which the state kills by design. As Zara Kazemi's case illustrates, death in detention from torture is not accidental, despite that usually being the claim by the state involved. It's not the action of rogue individuals or bad apples. Torture is intended to not just punish, but destroy the person. Death is not just a possible outcome, it can be the objective. One of the most pernicious ways that the state can manifest lethality is through enforced disappearances. Victims of enforced disappearances are people who've literally disappeared. They go missing when state officials or someone acting with the state's sort of consent or encouragement grabs them from the street, from their homes, and then deny it and refuse to say where the person is. These people are often never released and their fate remains unknown. A person who's disappeared is at very high risk of torture because they're placed completely outside the protection of the law. No access to lawyers, no one knows where there is. Many are killed or live in constant fear of being killed. And enforced disappearance is frequently used as a strategy to spread terror within society. The feeling of insecurity and fear the feeling of security and the fear it generates is not limited to the close relatives of the disappeared, but also affects communities as a whole. Human rights defenders, relatives of those who are already disappeared, key witnesses, lawyers are particular targets for disappearance. And again, what's notable here is the circle for this specific violence being committed by the state widens from the initial target to those surrounding them. Perhaps the best known instance of mass enforced disappearance in the 20th century was the last dictatorship in Argentina. During military rule between 1976 and 1983, the security forces abducted an astounding 30,000 people, many of whom are still unaccounted for. There were widespread systematic human rights violations with torture and extrajudicial executions taking place on a grand scale. This included the notorious death flights in which victims were literally dropped to their deaths from military planes or helicopters, sometimes over bodies of water. But thanks to the relentless campaigning by civil society, in this case, many of the military officials and government figures suspected of criminal responsibility in those disappearances have in fact been brought to justice. In Syria, over 100,000 people have been subjected to enforced disappearances since 2011. The overwhelming majority of those vanished into a network of government detention centers, such as Sednaya Prison, which Amnesty has released a number of reports on, as have other organizations. Thousands also went missing after being detained by armed opposition groups. With the recent fall of the al-Assad regime and the opening up of detention centers, many families hoped in vain to find their relatives alive, but what they found instead were mass graves. Whether we'll ever see justice in the case of the mass killing machine that was the Syrian detention system remains to be seen. Disappearances, as I've mentioned, tend to go hand in hand with extrajudicial executions. And extrajudicial execution is often defined as the unlawful and deliberate killing of a person carried out by order of a government, or again with its complicity or acquiescence. And typically they're carried out with absolutely no pretense of legality. For example, in the so-called war on drugs in the Philippines under former President Duarte, this war on drugs primarily targeted the poor and the more marginalized, resulting in thousands of killings during anti-drug operations. At one point, this was 6 a day. In Ethiopia, the regional conflicts in Tigray and Amhara have been marked by patterns of extrajudicial executions by soldiers moving through towns and villages. For example, men are pulled from houses and killed to prevent them from being future recruits for the so-called whatever the wrong side is perceived to be. Sometimes the killings were more random, simply as a warning to support whoever the wrong side was at that moment. But in recent years, we hear less talk of an extrajudicial execution and more talk of targeted killings and assassinations. So whether inside or outside an officially recognized armed conflict, so-called targeted killings more often than not involve collateral damage. And this is the polite term for killing people, usually civilians, who aren't the specific target. All of it assumes that the intelligence that identified the target individual or individuals in the first place was accurate. So in the context of armed conflict, and that's a situation where lethal force by the state is a given, one can debate sort of the proportionality or whether the attack was indiscriminate or even when the area is part of the active battlefield. And the current genocide in Gaza is marked by countless examples of this. We see attacks on civilian infrastructure, such as apartment buildings, schools, hospitals, refugee camps, places declared to be safe areas, all based on claims of particular people being there, in this case, such as commanders from Hamas or other armed groups. But the attack is undertaken knowing that many people beyond that intended target will be killed. Outside of armed conflict, targeted killing is really just another form of extrajudicial execution. But what's different in recent years is really the approach and the lethality of this tactic. Targeted killing via unmanned aerial vehicles, what most people call drones, became a new norm after around 2010, as the Obama administration in the US continued to prosecute the so-called war on terror. And these targeted killing policies of the US government were notable for four things in particular. You may remember just a few moments ago, I mentioned sort of the debate over where the battlefield is. These targeted killing policies relied on a sort of global war legal theory that treated the entire world as a battlefield between the US and armed groups in which lethal force could be used without regard to human rights standards anywhere. Secondly, it also invoked the right to use force in self-defense to justify the deliberate killing of virtually anyone suspected of involvement in any sort of a wide range of armed groups or whatever was defined in the moment as terrorism against the US, particularly through this sort of adoption of a very radical reinterpretation of the concept of imminence, imminent threat. Thirdly, reportedly, these policies involved a guilty until proven innocent approach that was taken to military-age males who were killed by a drone strike, even if there was no specific evidence that they were directly participating in hostilities in a specific armed conflict. And this is notable because in so many of these strikes, and when you think of even things we're hearing in the news in other contexts today, they talk about the number of militants killed, which is a very intentional use of language to suggest that there's something other than a legitimate armed force as opposed to civilians. But this was all in the context of just anybody in this particular category they assumed was some sort of combatant. And of course, lastly, these programs were marked by an overwhelming shroud of secrecy around the factual and legal details of how the program operated. And again, this is a program designed to specifically kill people anywhere in the world. What happened over the following years is that thousands were killed in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, and Yemen, and elsewhere. And it's really notable that the term, the terms used here, like language in this discussion is so important because we talk about targeted killings. And it sounds very precise. This is always made to sound very precise, but the intelligence guiding this program was at times highly questionable. And in court, like The Intercept did a number of investigations, and when they looked at one 5-month period in 2013, and they were looking at leaked Pentagon documents for this. So they were looking at the source. 90% of those killed by the US drone strikes in Operation Haymaker, which was a special operation campaign in northeastern Afghanistan, were unintended targets. So targeted killings, not so targeted. So Obama eventually transferred the direction of the drone program to the CIA, from the CIA, to the US military. It continues now, again, still very shrouded in secrecy. We don't know the extent of it. And, it includes both drones, that's what we often hear about, but also ground operations by special forces. In 2002, the Biden administration did release some new guidelines for these lethal strikes outside of recognized war zones. In other words, the entire world. But it did little to ensure greater adherence to international human rights or humanitarian law standards. And of course, the use of drones by security forces around the world is just ubiquitous now. So I'm going to end in terms of patterns on what is perhaps the widest and most indiscriminate net that gets cast in terms of state violence, and that is the crackdown on public protest. So the way police and other state authorities engage with protesters has become increasingly militarized around the world since the early 2000s. And that militarization is happening in a number of ways. So sometimes it's literally the deployment of armed military forces to suppress protest. It also involves supplying police with equipment that is military equipment. Armored vehicles, military-grade aircraft, surveillance drones, guns, assault weapons, stun grenades, sound cannons, and the like. So military forces are organized and trained and equipped for war and defense, and they have no place at a protest in any form. The police who are there, again, should not be acting in a quasi-military way. They should be trained in de-escalation, mediation, and keeping people safe. Public protest is a right. The police should be there to ensure people can protest, not to crack down on it. But governments try to justify this disproportionate escalation in the use of force by painting protesters as a threat to public safety. These tactics are ultimately a way to try to intimidate people into silence. I know it'll be discussed in greater detail later, but of course, hundreds of people were killed by security forces during the Women Life Freedom protests in Iran. And what's notable is that the use of live ammunition by security forces in particular exposes a clear intent to kill or maim protesters in their quest to sort of reel in the popular uprising at any cost. You don't use live ammunition unless you intend to kill people. Similarly, in Mozambique, in the post-election protests just last year, over 300 people have died. Amnesty's research has confirmed, again, instances of security forces firing rifles and handguns directly at protesters, aiming tear gas canisters directly at people. And in one case, an armored combat vehicle, again, a military-style vehicle, hit a woman at speed on a roadway, causing serious injuries, and just drove off. Last summer, Bangladeshi authorities issued shoot on-site orders used during the student protests, resulting in almost 1,000 deaths. Last Saturday was World Press Freedom Day, and I'm going to leave you with what is perhaps one of the most frightening statistics about state violence from 2024, and that is the killing of journalists. We started with a story of a photojournalist, so I'm going to end with a story of journalists. The number of journalists killed in 2024 reached new heights. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, at least 124 journalists and media workers were killed last year. Nearly 2/3 of them were Palestinians killed by Israel. And why target journalists? This is intentional targeting of journalists, not accidents. It's because you want to kill the story. Human rights abuses thrive in secrecy. So many of these intentional programs of state violence aimed at killing people are shrouded in secrecy. But we must always be the light that shines into that darkness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hillary. Lots to unpack there. I just want to give a reminder to people listening online. Please send in your questions in the Q&A section. You just go down here on the screen and you'll see it there. It says Q&A. So shoot us your questions in there. You can do it in English or Persian. We will translate for you. Our next speaker will be speaking in Persian. And just a note that the English translation will be running on the screen. Our next panelist is Parastu Furuhar. Parastu is an Iranian installation artist who lives and works out of Frankfurt, Germany. Furuhar's art reflects her criticism of the Iranian government and often plays with the ideas of identity. Her artwork expresses a critical response towards the politics in Iran and Islamic fundamentalism. The loss of her parents, Dariush and Parvaneh, fuels Furuhar's work and challenges viewers to take a stand on war crimes against innocent citizens. Her work has been exhibited around the world, including Iran, Germany, Russia, Turkey, England, and the United States. Come to Canada. Parastu is the daughter of political activist Parvaneh Furuhar Iskandari and politician Dariush Furuhar. Both were brutally murdered in their home by agents of the Islamic Republic in 1998. Parastu John, the floor is yours. You are muted. Thank you. Merci.
So, thank you very much. خیلی ممنون از این معرفی جانانه. با سلام و قدردانی از برگزار کنندگان این سلسله نشست ها و سپاس فراوان برای دعوت از من به عنوان یکی از بازماندگان قربانیان قتل های سیاسی در ایران که سالهاست برای دادخواهی این جنایت های حکومتی تلاش می‌کند. مادر و پدر من پروانه و داریوش فروهر از مخالفان سیاسی سرشناس جمهوری اسلامی بودند که علیرغم سرکوب گسترده حاکم هیچگاه دست از مبارزه برای دستیابی به دموکراسی و جدایی دین از دولت نکشیدند. آنها در شب 1 آذر سال 1377 در خانه‌شان در تهران به دست گروهی از مأموران وزارت اطلاعات با ضربه‌های پرشمار چاقو به قتل رسیدند. آن دو تنها قربانیان قتل‌های سیاسی در آن پاییز نبودند. حمید حاجیزاده، شاعر اهل کرمان و پسر 10 سالش کارون، پیروز دوانی، کنشگر سیاسی و ناشر، مجید شریف، کنشگر سیاسی و نویسنده، محمد مختاری، شاعر، پژوهشگر و عضو برجسته کانون نویسندگان ایران و محمد جعفر پوینده، مترجم، پژوهشگر و عضو برجسته کانون نویسندگان ایران نیز در همان روزها یکی پس از دیگری به قتل رسیدند. و از سالها پیش از آن پاییز شوم 77 دگراندیشان ایرانی در درون و بیرون کشور قربانی قتل‌های سیاسی شدند. فرایند مخوفی که از سوی ساختار قدرت در ایران به قصد سرکوب ظرفیت‌های دگراندیشی و کانون‌های اعتراض در جامعه به اجرا درآمد، جان شریف آدمی و عزم انسانی او را برای دستیابی به آزادی و عدالت در تله خشونت و وحشت گرفتار کرد و رد خونینی از بیداد بر تاریخ سرزمین ما کشید. هنوز شمار و نام تمام قربانیان این جنایت‌ها بر ما روشن نیست. در این گفتار سعی کردم برای درک بستر فکری و سازوکار اجرایی این جنایت‌ها آنها را در بافتار تاریخی سرکوب حکومتی در دوره‌های پیشین جمهوری اسلامی گذاشته و به اختصار تبیین کنم. سرکوب و حتی قتل و غارت وابستگان گروه‌های اجتماعی متفاوت که تندروهای مذهبی آنان را دشمن انگاری کردند، از همان ابتدای روی کار آمدن جمهوری اسلامی به راه افتاد. از یک سو با گماردن حاکمان شرع و به راه انداختن دادگاه‌های انقلاب اسلامی که مستقل از دستگاه قضایی عرفی کشور عمل می‌کردند و حکم اعدام و زندان و مصادره اموال و اخراج از کار و تحصیل می‌دادند. از سوی دیگر
با میدان دادن به نیروهای شبه نظامی مذهبی که خود را حزب اللهی می‌دانستند و بازوی اجرایی سرکوب‌ها بودند. به گرد همایی‌ها و قرارگاه‌های سازمان‌های دگراندیش، نشریه‌های انتقادی یورش می‌بردند، خانه و کاشانه بهائیان را ویران می‌کردند، برای سرکوب خیزش‌های منطقه‌ای و قومی بسیج می‌شدند و دیگر. در بهار 1360 و در پی شبه کودتایی که به قدرتگیری کامل تندروهای مذهبی انجامید، سرکوب مخالفان نقطه عطفی فراگیر و لجام گسیخته یافت. هزاران تن بازداشت یا در درگیری‌های خیابانی زخمی و کشته شدند. هزاران تن از زندانیان در همان سال به مرور اعدام شدند. همچنان احکام را حاکمان شرع و دادگاه‌های انقلاب صادر می‌کردند و زندانبان و بازجو و مجری حکم‌های شکنجه و اعدام دنباله همان نیروهای شبه نظامی حزب اللهی بودند که به مرور در ساختارهای رسمی حکومت سازماندهی می‌شدند و پست و درجه می‌گرفتند. در آن دوره هر روز فهرست طولانی نام اعدامی‌ها مانند خطابه پیروزی آن لشکر حاکم با ذکر آیه در اخبار خوانده می‌شد. هر از گاه چهره در هم شکسته زندانیانی که ابراز پشیمانی می‌کردند و خود و همراهان سیاسیشان را به خیانت و گناه متهم می‌کردند بر صفحه تلویزیون ظاهر می‌شد. شهرها پر بود از پست‌های بازرسی که جلوی پیاده و سواره را می‌گرفتند و تفتیش و خشونت می‌کردند. این همه وحشت و وادادگی را در جامعه دامن می‌زد. سالهای مخوف دهه 60 برای مخالفان سیاسی فضایی مانند مسلخ داشت. بسیاری از کشور گریختند و به تبعید رفتند. بخش بزرگ آنان که ماندند در انزوا یا سکوت فرو رفتند. در چنین فضایی برای سالها پیگیری وضعیت هزاران زندانی سیاسی در زندانهای گوناگون کشور بر دوشهای تنهای بستگان آنان افتاد. جامعه در ایران از مسئولیت خویش در برابر آنان درماند و پاپس کشید. کشتار جمعی زندانیان سیاسی در تابستان 1367 در چنین شرایطی امکان یافت. هنوز شمار و نام تمامی قربانیان این کشتار بر ما روشن نیست. این موج اعدام اما برخلاف اعدام‌های اوایل دهه 60 در پنهانکاری شدید دستگاه حاکمه اجرا شد. تنها سالها بعد بود که گوشه‌هایی از سازوکار این جنایت افشا شد. با شهادت‌های جان به در بردگان آن کشتار و خانواده‌های قربانیان، اسنادی که به همت آیت الله منتظری ثبت شده‌اند و تلاش‌های مدافعان حقوق بشر و مخالفان سیاسی در ثبت و بررسی شواهد. مدت کوتاهی پس از کشتار زندانیان سیاسی و در آذر ماه همان سال 67 خبر قتل کاظم سامی از مخالفان سرشناس سیاسی در ایران منتشر شد. این قتل در حافظه جمعی به عنوان یکی از نخستین حلقه‌ها در زنجیره قتل‌های سیاسی ثبت شده است. سامی به طرز وحشیانه‌ای با ضربه‌های چاقوی یک فرد مهاجم در مطبش کشته شد. در روایت رسمی عنوان شد که قتل از سر دشمنی شخصی انجام شده است. خانواده و نزدیکان سیاسی او برای تن دادن به این صحنه‌سازی دروغ مورد تهدید و آزار قرار گرفتند. و این شبیه همان الگویی است که دستگاه حاکمه به شکلی وسیع در کشتار زندانیان سیاسی در سال 67 به کار بسته بود. الگوی پنهانکاری جنایت و عدم پذیرش مسئولیت پاسخگویی و نیز تهدید و ارعاب بازماندگان و منع آنان از خبررسانی و برگزاری آیین سوگواری. البته الگوهای دیگر سرکوب که در قتل‌های سیاسی به کار بسته شد پیشینه بیشتری دارند. به ابتدای جمهوری اسلامی باز می‌گردند و به ویژه از بهار 60 به سازوکار حکومت در نابود کردن مخالفان خود بدل شدند. از جمله تعیین مجازات‌ها بر مبنای احکام شرع و فتواهای مذهبی و نیز بیرحمی و کینه‌توزی مفرط با قربانیان و حتی جسدهایشان. رد این الگوها در قتل‌های سیاسی که به ویژه در دهه 70 رواج یافتند به وضوح آشکار است. قتل‌ها همان هدف حاکمیت در اعدام‌ها را دنبال می‌کردند. خشکاندن ظرفیت‌های اعتراض و حق‌خواهی در میان مخالفان سیاسی و دیگراندیشان و نیز پاسداری از جو وحشت و وادادگی در جامعه. سعیدی سیرجانی نویسنده نامدار در زندان به قتل رسید و گفتند سکته قلبی کرده است. اما بیشتر دیگر قربانیان یا در خانه‌ای به قتل رسیدند مانند عبدالرحمن قاسملو، عبدالرحمن برومند و شاپور بختیار از سرشناسترین رهبران مخالفان سیاسی و خواننده و شومن پرآواز فریدون فرخزاد، غفار حسینی شاعر و مترجم و عضو کانون نویسندگان ایران که در اروپا و ایران کشته شدند، یا جسدشان در کوچه ها و حاشیه اتوبان ها در ایران پیدا شد. مانند هایک هوسپیان مهر، کشیش برجسته، ابراهیم زالزاده ناشر و روزنامه نگار یا چهره‌های فرهنگی سرشناسی چون احمد میرعلایی مترجم و احمد تفضلی پژوهشگر. واکنش دستگاه حاکمه کتمان نقش خویش بود و ارعاب بستگان قربانیان برای سکوت. واکنش اجتماعی به قتل‌های سیاسی در درون ایران نیز تا سالها همان بود که نسبت به کشتار 67 نشان داده شد. ناباوری و چشم پوشی، فقدان پرسشگری و پیگیری درخور. تا آذر 1375 که در برابر قتل سیاسی ماموستا محمد ربیعی از رهبران مذهبی در کردستان که در پی یک سخنرانی انتقادی کشته شد و جسدش در یک ترمینال پیدا شد، موج اعتراض بلند شد و در شهرهای کردنشین چنان بالا گرفت که حتی به درگیری مردم با نیروهای انتظامی کشید. تعداد پرشماری کشته شدند. این خیزش دادخواهانه را میتوان پیش قراول شکستن سکوت جامعه در برابر قتل‌های سیاسی دگراندیشان دانست. اگرچه اعتراض به شهرهای کردنشین محدود ماند، اما نمودی شد از رشد اعتراض زیر پوست زخم خورده معترضان به نظام حاکم. از سوی دیگر در بیرون از ایران نیز با پیگیری قضایی قتل رهبران کرد، صادق شرفکندی، فتاح عبدلی، همایون اردلان و کنشگر سیاسی نوری دهکردی در رستوران میکونوس در برلین، حقایق بسیاری از نقش سران بلند پایه جمهوری اسلامی در این جنایت و ارتباط سازمانی جنایت با نهادهای حکومتی افشا و اثبات شد. صدور حکم دادگاه میکونوس در سال 1375 نقطه عطفی ساخت در واکنش جامعه جهانی به پروژه قتل‌های سیاسی که حکومت ایران سالها بود اجرا می‌کرد. با این رأی جمهوری اسلامی دچار بحران مشروعیت در عرصه روابط دیپلماتیک شد. اما در پایان بهار سال 1376 با مشارکت بخش بزرگی از جامعه، دولت محمد خاتمی با وعده اصلاح حکومت و احترام به حقوق مردم و بحران زدایی در روابط بین المللی روی کار آمد. این گونه وجهه حکومت ایران در درون کشور و در عرصه جهانی بهبود یافت. خوشبینی جای واقع بینی را گرفت. در چنین شرایطی تنها طیف کوچکی از مخالفان سیاسی در ایران با آن هیجانات خوشباورانه همسو نشدند. آنان ساختارهای جمهوری اسلامی را بازدارنده اصلاحات می‌نامیدند، بر آزادی بی‌حصر بیان، حذف نهادهای سانسور و سرکوب و جدایی دین از دولت پافشاری می‌کردند. این طیف اگرچه در آن دوران هنوز از انسجام و حضور مؤثر اجتماعی برخوردار نبود، اما اعتبار اجتماعی و ظرفیت رشد گفتمانی و یارگیری بالایی داشت و می‌توانست در چشمانداز ناتوانی اصلاح طلبان در اجرای خواسته‌های مردم بسترساز حرکت‌های رهایی بخش در جامعه شود و به نیروی مؤثر در برابر نظام حاکم ببالد. قتل‌های سیاسی پاییز 77 این طیف و این ظرفیت سیاسی پیشرو در جامعه ایران را هدف گرفت. انتشار خبر قتل‌ها در پاییز 77 موجی از بهت و خشم عمومی برانگیخت. وجدان زخم خورده جامعه شرمسار از ستمی که بر دگراندیشان در ایران رفته بود، علی‌رغم جو ترس و وحشت بانگ فریاد برآورد و حرکت پرتوانی از دادخواهی در ایران به راه افتاد. این حرکت با موج اعتراض در سطح جهانی همراه شد، چه از سوی ایرانیان تبعیدی و مهاجر و افکار عمومی دیگر کشورها، چه از سوی سازمان‌های مدافع حقوق بشر و حتی نهادهای حکومتی. زیر این فشار بی‌سابقه نظام حاکم در ایران ناچار به واکنش شد. این جنایت‌ها را محکوم کرد، وعده پیگیری داد و مهمتر از همه ناچار به پذیرش مسئولیت شد. در نیمه دی ماه 1377 وزارت اطلاعات جمهوری اسلامی با صدور یک اطلاعیه به ارتکاب 4 قتل، پروانه و داریوش فروهر، محمد مختاری، محمد جعفر پوینده، از سوی گماشتگان خود اعتراف کرد. اگرچه که با محدود جلوه دادن مسئولیت به چند مأمور خودسر و برداشت‌های نادرست آنان تلاش شده بود تا بافت سازمانی و ساختار آمریت در این جنایت‌ها انکار شود و از بازخواست مصون بماند. جا انداختن این روایت مخدوش را کاربدستان قضایی پرونده قتل‌ها بر عهده گرفتند. آنها از همان ابتدا روند تحقیقات را به بهانه حفظ امنیت ملی از افکار عمومی و حتی از ما بازماندگان قربانیان و وکیل‌هایمان پنهان کردند. از سوی دیگر نیز با سناریو پردازی‌های گمراه کننده سعی در ابطال وقت و مهار خشم عمومی داشتند. جامعه اما در ابتدا تسلیم این صحنه‌سازی‌ها نشد. از پرسشگری درباره ابعاد و خط و ربط فکری و سازمانی این جنایت‌ها و به ویژه دستوردهندگان آن باز نایستاد و بر گرد خواست دادرسی عادلانه یک نیروی اجتماعی شکل گرفت. این نیروی زاینده اما دوام زیادی نیاورد، زیرا سرکوب جنبش دانشجویی 18 تیر و یورش به نسل جوانی که نیروی تازه نفس مطالبه‌های مدنی و سیاسی از جمله دادخواهی قتل‌های سیاسی بود، توقیف گسترده مطبوعات و بازداشت روزنامه‌نگارانی که در افشاگری قتل‌ها نقش داشتند، همچنین بالا گرفتن موج تهدید و بازداشت کنشگران سیاسی دوباره جوی از ترس و انفعال بر فضای سیاسی تحمیل کرد. در این میان جناح اصلاح طلب حکومت نیز به مرور از خواستهای جامعه عقب نشینی می‌کرد. دست آخر نیز نهادهای قضایی و امنیتی نشر هر گونه انتقاد از روند پیگیری پرونده قتل‌های سیاسی را ممنوع اعلام کردند و فضایی از سکوت و مماشات بر پیگیری پرونده غالب شد. در این خلأ پدید آمده دستگاه قضایی جمهوری اسلامی در پاییز 1379 با برپایی یک دادگاه فرمایشی پرونده را بدون دادرسی عادلانه و شفاف مختومه کرد. اگرچه آن دادگاه فرمایشی پذیرش عمومی نیافت، اما اعتراض تأثیرگذاری نیز برنیانگیخت. افشاگری‌ها و اعتراضهای ما جمع کوچک بازماندگان جانباختگان هم نه تنها نتوانست تغییری در این روند پدید آورد که به زندانی شدن یکی از وکیل‌های ما ناصر زرافشان و تبعیدی شدن همسر یکی از قربانیان سیما صاحبی انجامید. نه کمیسیون اصل 90 مجلس پاسخی به شکایت ما داد، نه دادگاه تجدید نظر. درخواستمان از کمیسیون حقوق بشر سازمان ملل متحد و کمیساریای عالی اعدام‌های فراقضایی برای تحقیق و بررسی، از آنجا که دستگاه قضایی جمهوری اسلامی حاضر به پاسخگویی به این نهادها نشد، بی‌نتیجه ماند. یکی از الگوهای تکرار شونده در نظام سرکوب لاپوشانی و سناریو پردازی‌های گمراه کننده است برای عدم پذیرش مسئولیت و مهار خشم عمومی. در مدت 2 سالی که تحقیقات قضایی قتل‌های سیاسی پاییز 77 به درازا کشید، هر از گاه خبری در ارتباط با این پرونده منتشر شد، یکی عجیب‌تر از دیگری. مثلا متهم ردیف اول پرونده که سالها معاون و بعد مشاور وزیر اطلاعات بود، در زندان واجبی خورد و مرد. بعد از مدتی اعلام شد که رد پای جاسوسان خارجی در قتل‌ها شناسایی شده. بعد کشف شد که هدف قتل‌ها توطئه بر ضد سران نظام بوده. بعد از مدتی به پرونده لقب دهان پرکن ملی دادند. بعد گفتند متهمان فساد مالی و روابط عجیب و غریب جنسی داشتند. فیلم شکنجه متهمان و اعضای خانوادهشان منتشر شد و بعد از مدتی خبر بازداشت بازجوهای پرونده را پخش کردند. چند بار هم شایعه گم شدن پرونده پخش شد. همزمان هم جزوه‌های زرد و جنجالی افشاگری منتشر می‌شد که گفتمان دادخواهی را به گرداب پوچی و ابتذال می‌کشید. در آن 2 سال با هر نشانی از تغییر در پرونده من به تهران می رفتم. در هر سفر ساعتها پشت در کار به دستان پرونده انتظار می کشیدم. اگر موفق به دیدار این جنابان می شدم، هر یک از نو به من اطمینان می داد که تعهدش به کشف حقیقت و اجرای عدالت از من بیشتر است. هر بار پاسخ پرسش‌هایم را به پایان تحقیقات حواله می کردند. وقتی آن موعد پایان تحقیقات در شهریور 79 فرا رسید، 10 روز برای خواندن آن پرونده ملی مهلت داده شد. من به تهران رفتم. پرونده شامل 12 کلاسور پربرگ بود. نمیدانم در چند صفحه، چون برگ‌های آن 3 بار شماره گذاری شده بود و از جا به جای آن 10 صفحه را بیرون کشیده بودند. نمودی از اصطلاح آشولاش در زبان فارسی. اعتراف‌های متهمان تک‌نویسی‌هایی بود بلند و آشفته و به قول ناصر زرفشان وکیل ما مصداق بارز تبانی متهم و بازجو. اما از لابلای اعتراف‌های متهمان که همگی کارمندان رسمی دولت در وزارت اطلاعات بودند، جمله‌های هولناکی بیرون زده بود که افشاگر الگوهای جا افتاده سرکوب هستند. گیومه، کار حذف فیزیکی و دیگر کارها از قبیل دستگیری، انتقال متهم و مراقبت ثابت و غیره از سال 70 در پرینت کاری از طرف وزارت برای ما مشخص شده بود و جزء وظایف قسمت ما بود. گیومه بسته. یا باز دوباره گیومه، این نوع مأموریت‌ها را تیم‌های بسیاری انجام دادند و جوایز بزرگ دریافت کرده‌اند و بنده هم موظف به تشکیلات اطلاعات هستم. بستگی. نقل قول، این نوع کارها در وزارت زیاد انجام می‌شد، در داخل یا چه در خارج، و تنها در این مورد بود که به این صورت درآمد. پایان نقل قول. دوباره نقل قول، این نمونه اقدام‌ها روال کار تشکیلات وزارت بوده و در نتیجه اقدامات مذکور بار اول این جانب نیز نبوده. از چندین سال قبل از حذف‌های موسوم به قتل‌های زنجیره‌ای ما با آن مأنوس بودیم، تا حدی که در پیشبینی برنامه‌های سالانه شاخص‌ترین فعالیت‌های حذف و ربایش در نظر گرفته می‌شد و این امر هنوز به صورت مکتوب در اسناد تشکیلات باقی است. یک نقل قول دیگه، پس از حذف از منزل خارج شدیم و به محل کار مراجعه نمودیم. حتی به علت طولانی شدن کار، اضافه کاری آن شب را برای بنده محاسبه نموده و به همراه حقوق بنده توسط فیش حقوقی پرداخت شد. منظور اینجا اون شب قتل پدر و مادر من در خونه‌شونه. کار منظور قتله. یا مصداق آن الگوی دشمن‌انگاری برای توجیه جنایت، نقل قول، آنچه عمل شده در 2 حوزه لایک ها، یعنی میلیون مرتد و کانون نویسندگان بوده. پایان نقل قول. و مصداق الگوی مذهبی و پیروی از احکام شرعی، نقل قول، تمام برادران در هر کاری که شرکت کنند با وضو بوده و با ذکر مأموریت انجام می‌دهند. پایان نقل قول. درباره هیچ یک از این اعتراف‌های هولناک هیچ توضیحی از متهمان خواسته نشده بود. هیچ تحقیقی درباره آن فیش حقوقی و پرینت کاری و برگه این مأموریت و مأموریت‌های قبلی و آن اسناد تشکیلات که نوشته بودند انجام نشده بود. ما بازماندگان قربانیان اعلام کردیم که صلاحیتی برای این دادرسی پوشالی نمی‌شناسیم و در دادگاه فرمایشی شرکت نمی‌کنیم. دادگاه اما تشکیل شد و رأی مفصل آن نیز در روزنامه‌ها چاپ شد تا پایان نمایش دادرسی را به عموم اعلام کند. برای 3 تن از مأموران اجرای قتل‌ها، 2 نفر که چاقو به تن پروانه فروهر و داریوش فروهر زده بودند و 1 نفر که طناب به گلوی محمد مختاری و محمد جعفر پوینده انداخته و آن را کشیده بود، حکم قصاص صادر شد. اختیار اجرای حکم قصاص را بنابر قانون شرع به ما بستگان درجه 1 قربانیان واگذاردند. ما اعلام کردیم که با اعدام مخالف هستیم و مجازات مرگ را برای هیچ کس نمی‌خواهیم. مخالفت ما با حکم اعدام را بخشش متهمان خواندند و دستاویز کردند تا در دادگاه تجدید نظر که ما حتی از تشکیل آن خبردار نشدیم، با لغو حکم‌های قصاص مجازات دیگر متهمان پرونده را نیز کاهش دهند. سپس پرونده مختومه شد. از قتل سیاسی پدر و مادرم حالا 26 سال و 5 ماه و 20 روز گذشته است. گذشته‌ای که پایان نیافته، که تکرار شده و رد خونین آن تا به امروز ما کشیده است. چه جانهای عزیزی، چه تنهای ترد و جوانی، کودکانی که در این سالها پرپر شدند، قربانی همان الگوها و همان نظام سرکوب. و این هزاران هزار کشته، این خیل عظیم قربانیان جنایت‌های سیاسی، رفتگانی هستند که خاک سپاریشان ناتمام مانده است. مرگشان بر جهان ما زندگان سنگینی می کند. تنها زمانی می توان سرگذشت آنان را به گذشته سپرد که دادخواهی ما به سرانجامی عادلانه رسیده باشد. با امید به آن روز، با امید به زن، زندگی، آزادی. مرسی.
Merci, Parastu John. Thank you very much, Parastu. May I say the sun beaming on your face is very beautiful right now. I know it's not easy speaking about the very personal political assassination of both of your parents, so I want to thank you very much for sharing that with all of us and taking us through the very long history of Iran's state-sanctioned violence and the patterns of repression. It reminded me of Saeed Mortazavi when they were speaking to him about the killing of Zahra Kazemi. He said, "I have no need for the law. I am the law." I just want to urge everyone to please keep your questions coming in. We will get to all of them at the end of all of our panelists speaking today. Our next speaker for today is Dr. Hamed Esmailion, who is a writer and human rights activist, and when he has time, he's also a dentist. Hamed has published a number of novels that earned him several awards from top Iranian literary circles, and some of them were also banned by the Islamic Republic. Hamed lost his wife and daughter, who were aboard Ukrainian flight PS-752, which was brutally shot down by IRGC missiles over the skies of Tehran on January 8th, 2020. He published his memories in the aftermath of that tragedy in a book titled It Snows in This House. Since the tragic loss of his family, Dr. Esmaeilion has dedicated his life to seeking justice, not only for his own family members, but for the entirety of the victims of Flight PS-752. He helped to form the Association of Families of Flight PS-752 Victims in Canada and was the first spokesperson and president of the association. Mr. Esmaeilion led the campaign for justice on behalf of the families and around the world. His efforts on behalf of the association have been instrumental in affecting the discourse in the legal and governmental activities relating to this case. Hamed's steadfast determination to fight for justice and human rights has been an inspiration to many of us on this webinar and to many people around the world and inside Iran. Hamed Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Samira Jan, for the introduction, and thanks to the team. Salam mikonam be hame. Good afternoon. It is very difficult to speak in a short time about the Islamic Republic and the crimes that it has committed over all these years. Even today, as I speak with you, a large number of prisoners are facing imminent execution. The danger of execution threatens brave women such as Sharife Mohammadi, Varishe Moradi, and Pakhshan Azizi. In recent weeks, dozens of Iranian Baluch citizens have been sent to the gallows. If I'm not mistaken, up to this day, the Islamic Republic has set a new record of executions in 2025. Certainly you have in your programs guests who are familiar with the workings of the judiciary of the Islamic Republic, and they can describe for you better than I the systematic killing apparatus called the judiciary of the Islamic Republic. I speak as a victim of the regime and as someone who for more than 5 years has become familiar with different legal processes in the world, in Canada, and in Iran. What happened on January 8, 2020? The crimes of the Islamic Republic did not begin with the downing of Flight PS-752. For decades before this crime, since many Iranian and non-Iranian families sat in mourning for loved ones who were killed by the regime. The instruments of the killing varied from the many security entities to the Revolutionary Guard Corps, and from the judiciary to plainclothes operatives. In the case of Flight PS-752, the Revolutionary Guard Corps was directly implicated in this heinous crime. Flight PS-752 was supposed to fly at 5:15 in the morning of the 8th of January from Tehran to Kiev. It took off at 6:12 with no explanations as to the cause of the delay. 3 minutes later, it was struck by at least 2 missiles of the Revolutionary Guard's anti-aircraft batteries stationed that very night near the airport. 3 minutes and 42 terrifying seconds passed for the passengers and crew, and finally it crashed to the ground in the southwest of Tehran in an area called Shahed Shahr. All 176 passengers, the crew, and an unborn child were senselessly murdered in yet another heinous crime by the regime. They bulldozed and looted the crash site. They confiscated the belongings of the passengers. They took the black boxes as hostages. And they prepared shambolic reports. No answers so far for a lot of questions that the families have. What path for seeking justice exists in today's world for victims of terrorism? If you ask me, there is no independent way to obtain justice for the victims. Detailed explanations will be given about the internal mechanisms in the judiciary in Iran, but if you look from an international viewpoint, there's not the slightest possibility for those harmed by terrorism to take criminals to court independently without the involvement of a government. The International Criminal Court gives the greatest right to the states or to the prosecutor. And the small window that exists in the mechanism for victims, again, depends on the support of the states. The International Court of Justice answers only to the states. And in the matter of the downing of Flight PS752, which could consider one of the United Nations subsidiaries called the International Civil Aviation Organization as a decision-making body, again, it is the member states that are the main decision makers. In the affected countries such as Canada, the situation in criminal investigation is no better. In a crime like the downing of Flight PS752, it is the RCMP, the federal police, who must decide whether to open a criminal file or not. And civil courts pay little attention to the criminal dimensions of the crime. There is no path to reach truth and justice in this framework because neither does the Islamic Republic have any intent to appear in those courts as a defendant, nor is there any place for the truth in the conclusions of the court in such proceedings that is focused on probabilities and conclusions. It must be clear to all of you that in the Islamic Republic of Iran, the right to life and respect for human dignity has no place. But this does not mean that if a crime occurs in Iran, the entire world will devote its resources to finding the truth and carrying out justice. Instead, seeking truth and justice at the international level can easily become captive to international politics, geopolitical alliance building, or fall victim to expediencies and the passage of time. Meanwhile, the families of the victims must find a way to make governments cooperate with them, find a way to rally public opinion, find a way to guide the correct legal path toward the direction they want, unadulterated justice and truth, and along this road, reaching their objectives is next to impossible. International laws are full of horrible pitfalls that allow criminals to escape punishment. In this matter, the Islamic Republic makes use of different tools. 1. Engage in whataboutism and propaganda through their operatives outside the country. For example, a crime such as the Bandar Abbas disaster occurred 2 weeks ago in Iran. Immediately afterwards, some people inside and outside the country start comparing it with similar events elsewhere in the world. Regarding Aban, or Bloody November, in 2019, they compared it with similar crackdowns in other countries. Regarding political killings, they compared them with similar assassinations carried out by despotic governments and even democratic states. If they shoot down an airplane, they immediately place before you a list of airplanes that have been brought down by air defense systems fire throughout history to make you believe that what happened was only an accident that could occur any day, anywhere in the world. 2, they use legal methods to waste time and create obstacles in the path of justice. They hire the best lawyers at the expense of the people of Iran to win in international courts. They make the best use of stalling tactics. For example, in this very PS752 case, by questioning the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice and the ICAO Council, they have tried to delay the process for several years. These methods are recognized in the international arena. For example, after the case of Malaysian flight MH17 was brought to ICAO, the Russian government, which was the defendant, lodged dozens of complaints against various countries in the ICAO to slow and blunt the process of addressing the MH17 case. 3, the last tool of the Islamic Republic in violence, slander, and intimidation is violent slander and intimidation. They pursue this mission by targeting the families of the victims. For example, on social networks, they commit verbal violence and send death threats. In the real world and inside Iran, they pressure justice-seeking families with phone calls, summonses, persecution, and even arrest and beating. And in the case of PS752, all these have been experienced by various families inside and outside Iran. I can give you a very recent example. Like the night before yesterday, my mom was going back to Iran, and they confiscated her passport again at the airport. They searched her belongings, and now they say she has to go to an intelligence office to answer some questions that she won't go. So for victims of terrorism, there is no easy path to justice. Notice that if the Association of the Families of Flight PS752 did not exist, if many families were not living abroad, and the issue of dual nationality were not present, these very successes in keeping alive the memory of the victims of this crime and in pushing the case towards The Hague would also not have been possible. Why do we say we neither forget nor forgive? For years, the world has cited Nelson Mandela's famous phrase, "I forgive, but I do not forget," when faced with crimes against humanity. In my opinion, as someone who has followed the process of change in South Africa and has read the evaluations after the formation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Mr. Mandela's position and the support of famous and influential people such as Desmond Tutu provide a sentimentalized narrative of justice that matches neither today's world nor the current state of affairs in Iran. In Iranian culture and in the Persian language, there is no word for closure. In Iranian culture, the phenomenon of an impartial and independent court is unimaginable. A fair and impartial jury has never played a role in Iran's judicial system. What is happening these days in Iran that demonstrates something much deeper transpiring in Iranian society has no similarity to the role of religion and religious leaders in South Africa's experience. No arrangements or pact with the repressive and murderous system of the Islamic regime is possible. No one can imagine that Ali Khamenei, in the best case, would, like de Klerk, take the role of deputy to one of his opponents, even within Iran's existing system, so that the transition could occur. Moreover, in South Africa, no punishment occurred. No key people were handed to the court, and no effort was made to compensate the family's lost rights. Therefore, when we say we neither forget nor forgive, we speak not of revenge, but of fair adjudication. An adjudication that is not like the Islamic Republic's sham trials, an adjudication that does not end in the death penalty, torture, or violence. We do not want to become like our murderers, and this alone is sufficient reason for the demand for fair adjudication to replace any call for revenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Merci, Hamid John. Thank you so much, Hamid. We do have actually some questions about the South African example here in the Q&A. Maybe I'll start with that. And this is a question that comes from Babaki Yazdi. He's put this question to all the speakers. Maybe we can start with you, Hillary. Do you have any program to boycott the Islamic regime, such as the South African government, before they collapsed? He's speaking about trying to speed up the overthrow of the government in Iran, asking basically, is there any sort of boycott, divestment, sanction, that type of program vis-a-vis Iran?
So that's a tricky one for Amnesty. Boycotts are not generally a tactic that we undertake, nor do we seek to overthrow a regime or contribute to that in any way. Our role is to focus on exposing the human rights violations and that kind of thing. So from the point of view of Amnesty, no, we do not.
پرستو جان، ایشون میپرسن که چیزی مثلا دولت‌های دنیا هر وقت آفریقای جنوبی آفریقای جنوبی رو سانکشن کردن و دایوست کردن و بویکات کردن، چیزی اینطوری مثلا میتونیم درست کنیم ویزاوی ایران؟
فکر میکنم که انواع و اقسام این نوع از تحریم ها وجود داره. منتها اون چیزی که تعیین کننده است به نظر من و برای من مهمه جامعه مدنی و در داخل ایرانه و اینکه اون بتونه در مقابل این سیستم خودش رو مقاومتش رو افزایش بده. بعضی جاها حتی همونطور که هیلاری گفت ممکنه که این نوع از تحریم ها به جای اینکه جامعه مدنی رو قوی بکنه ضعیف بکنه حتی. یعنی من در این زمینه هیچ نوع تخصصی ندارم، منتها برای من مهم در واقع این هست که در داخل ایران اعتراضات داخل ایران مردم ایران اونها هستند که هم چشم امید من به اونهاست، هم این که فکر میکنم تأثیر گذارن و اونها بایستی تغییر رو بایستی در اونها دنبال کرد، نه در سیاست های در واقع فشاره که میتونه به صورت همزمان جامعه رو ضعیف کنه.
I'm just going to quickly translate. So Parastu said that she is not a sanctions expert. However, she does feel that there are significant sanctions already in place in terms of the international community. Her hope lies with the people inside Iran to, particularly in civil society, to push against the state repression of the government. And she says that at times these sort of international sanctions can also weaken civil society. So they're not always a good thing. And at the end of the day, she would like to see people inside the country be the ones who take the responsibility themselves and to combat the regime. Hamed John, for you.
Thank you. I kind of second Parasu's remarks, but what I have to say, in the last few years, we have seen a lot of different kind of sanctions on the Islamic Republic officials. I mean, we supported like Magnitsky sanction on the officials that they commit crime against human rights. Like there is a long list in Canada, and the IRGC is another list of terrorist organization in Canada. So and when we talk to the activists inside Iran, they support any kind of sanction against IRGC or the military personnel or people that they're involved in the crackdowns or like destroying the civil society in Iran. I mean, those people, yes, they should be, we have to make them accountable. But as I said, there are a lot of differences between the South African movement and Iran's movement right now. Like 30-some years has passed. And, if you look at the ANC at that time, so they existed for more than 70 years and they were very organized inside Iran. And when they asked the outside world to do the sanctions, there was a very powerful existing organization inside the country. So they worked hand in hand together inside the country. And unfortunately, we don't have that kind of organization inside Iran. We have a lot of powerful like civil society organizations. I mean, but we can't compare that to an ANC, unfortunately.
I have some, there are some Persian questions here. I'm going to ask Kati Navabi, one of our brilliant organizers here, to read some of those so that Parastu, you can start with answering them. Because if I attempt to read these right now, it's going to take me a good 10 minutes to get through them. So if I could ask Kati to read those questions, that would be great.
Yes, for sure. The first one is به نظر شما حکومت ایران تا چه اندازه از ایدئولوژی اسلامی برای ساکت کردن افرادی که خود به این ایدئولوژی باور دارند یا برای کنترل ذهن افرادی که در برابر این جنایات و کشتار کشتار بی‌طرف و خنثی هستند استفاده می‌کند.
So if I can, correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy John. So I'm just going to translate that question. How much of an impact do you think the Islamic ideology, a political ideology of Islam, has on those who enact this sort of state violence? Is that correct? Just like, I don't know. Ahmed, maybe you could tackle this one.
Yeah, you know, the Islamic Republic of Iran is all about ideology, nothing else. You know, this is the ideology that, as I said, sent thousands of people to the gallows. This is the ideology that sent 13-year-old or 14-year-old to the war. This is the ideology that, you know, can approve the assassination of innocent people like Parastu's parents. This is an ideology can convince an operator to shoot missiles to a civilian airplane full of children. So we are talking about ideology here. So because a normal person won't do that. So I think this is the ideology that runs the country. And this ideology, I think, has become a tool for fascism, in my opinion. So fascism could be in different ways. You know, fascism is a tool for ideologies. It doesn't matter which ideology it is. It's just the tool for that kind of ideology. And what we have seen in Iran in the last 46 years is just ideologic leaders and some brainwashed operatives and a gang of criminals. So, I mean, I don't see anything but ideology to oppress the people of Iran.
Sorry, I'm just going to, because the English translation is here, it says, in your opinion, to what extent does the Iranian government use Islamic ideology to silence the people, to control the minds of the people who are impartial in the face of these crimes and massacres? Pastor John, do you want to?
بله. خب این من سعی کردم توی صحبتم بگم که این در واقع یکی از الگوهای اصلی حکومته. از همون ابتدا در واقع این شکلگیری سیستم سرکوب بر پایه احکام شرعیه، بر پایه قرائت اونها از اسلامه. و اون نقل قولی هم که کردم از یکی از متهمان پرونده قتل پدر و مادرم، وقتی میگه که همه وضو میگیرن قبل از اینکه برن برای قتل کسی، این یعنی چی؟ یعنی اینکه اینها در واقع این حقانیت قضیه است براش، بهشون حقانیت میده این مذهب برای اینکه چنین کارهایی رو بکنن. اون کسی که مادر من رو به قتل رسونده خودش نوشته که با ذکر یا زهرا زدم، یعنی درست همونطور که دعا میکنه زن 60 ساله‌ای رو کشته با چاقو. یا بسیاری از زندانیان، به ویژه اونهایی که حالا من بیشتر میشناسم زندانیان دهه 60 هستن، میگن که موقع شکنجهشون، حالا خود شکنجه رو هم اسمشو عوض کردن گذاشتن تعزیر، یعنی اون هم مثل یعنی یک حکم مذهبیه. موقع شلاق زدن در واقع ذکر میگفتن، ذکر مذهبی میگفتن کسانی که میزدنشون. یعنی این هیچ شکی درش نیست که یکی از در واقع هم انگیزه و هم ابزار سرکوب بوده از همون ابتدا تا کنون. من خودم مثلا برای اینکه من هر سال میرم ایران و پیگیرانه سعی میکنم که یادآوری کنم این جنایت ها رو، و به هر سطح دائم هم بازجویی و احضار و اینها میشه. این یکی از کارهای هنری من و اینها بهش اتهام توهین به مقدسات زدن. آخه کار هنری چطور میتونه؟ به این دلیل منو دادگاهی کردن و همه اینها. این ابزار سرکوب هست، مسلمه، و از اون کاملا استفاده میکنن در تمام سطوح مختلف.
I'm just going to roughly translate that. So in my talk, I explained that this is one of the main pillars of this regime and the foundational shape of it. They pray before they kill. So in actuality, they have God on their side while they are committing these crimes. One of the men who stabbed my mother to death was citing verses as he did so in the name of Zahra. This is one of the women who is sort of foundational to Islam. Even political prisoners, as they are being tortured and whipped, their torturers are citing verses and uttering verses. And this plays two parts. It also gives them a reason to do what they do, and it also absolves them of that crime. When I go to Iran every year to bring attention to the killings of my parents and have a sort of ceremonial event to honor my parents, they also will bring me to court because of the art I've created around the killing of my parents. So this again shows how foundational this type of ideology is to their ability to commit crimes and then absolve themselves of that crime. I will go to the next question. Oh, sorry, Hillary, do you want to take this on actually? Anything to say with respect to ideology and political violence? It doesn't have to pertain to Iran in particular.
Well, just to say that there's always.
Oh, looks like we lost Hillary. Maybe your cat made its way across the keyboard there.
No, my bandwidth is occasionally quite low, so I've been dropping in and out a little bit. My apologies. Normally I would turn my camera off, but that's not the best thing to do when you're a panelist. But just say, in so many of these situations, what is driving, whether it's a pattern of disappearances or extrajudicial executions or targeted killings using drones or whatever, is some form of ideology. That belief that how you are framing what is right empowers you to set aside a framework of human rights or the rule of law and so on. It's whether you're talking about Guantanamo or the situation in Iran, that is a common thread. It's within the admission, if there is sort of a paper trail in any of this, and I think part of the challenge is often there isn't. As I said before, secrecy is quite a powerful tool here. But yeah, what is sorry, I've lost my my train of thought. Hang on a second. Okay, no, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. I just want to talk specifically about Iran a little bit in the sense that Parastu mentioned, these killings that happened in Berlin in 1992. So Iran, whereas countries say like Mozambique, for instance, where political violence happens inside the country, Iran is very well known for its extraterritorial political violence that it enacts on dissidents. So it doesn't just kill people within its borders. It will kidnap people, bring them inside the country, kill them there, or even kill its political opponents outside the country. So this really complicates the ability not only of people to be able to hold people to account. I mean, look at the situation with PS 752. Hamid, if I could just ask you about that. I mean, this is a situation where people who are citizens of other countries were killed inside a place, and then you had the government that did the killing being asked to investigate themselves. So it's this sort of very layered difficulty to hold to account such a thing in such scenarios. Can you speak to a little bit of that complexity, Hamid?
Yeah, of course. There's a convention in ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization. They call it Chicago Convention. It was, it goes back to 1944, the years that we were talking about never again. I mean, the human was talking about that, and they set up some rules for investigation of any kind of aircraft accident or crime or things like that. And they call it Annex 13. So based on Annex 13, the country of occurrence is leading the investigation. And the world had no problem with that Annex 13 since January 8, 2020. So imagine that this is the first time in the history that the very own country, the very country that downed the plane has to do the investigation. So the murderers has to do the very murder that they committed. So one of the biggest challenges that we had in Canada, we are hosting ICAO here in Montreal, and one of the challenges we had was to talk to our government here in Canada and to ICAO president and the members of the council that this is not right. I mean, because the Islamic Republic of Iran knows these things. I was talking about the legal challenges that we had to face during the last 6 years, but this is one of the challenges. And so when you fall victim of the terrorism of the regime, so Paris too has experienced that. So she had to go to the court and judiciary system inside Iran. There are sham trials, and finally they put the duty of condemnation on the shoulders of the victim. So Paris too had to say yes or no to the execution of the criminals if they were the actual criminals who committed the crime, that we know that they were not. I mean, they were just obeying orders. So this is inside the country. We had the same experience with PS75 too. There was a sham trial 3 years after the downing, and they were 18 sessions. So at the 16th session, majority of the families, they withdrew from the case, and they said, we don't trust you, we don't want to continue. And then 10 patsies were coming to the witness stand, and all the, I can tell you that they were reading out of paper. I mean, the accused, and the judge was asking questions, and the operator was saying, oh, let me see what it said here. So he just repeated what was written on the paper. So then finally, we don't know who those people were and where they are right now. Nobody's in prison. So then we had no hope in jurisdiction inside Iran. We had to act out of Iran. And as I said, the Islamic regime was leading the investigation in ICAO. And so far, unfortunately, there is not an active criminal investigation. We want something like Mykonos. Mykonos was done in like the court, the trial, was in Germany, and finally they had some arrest warrants for the leaders of the regime. We need something like that in Canada, and so far we couldn't do that, but we have been successful in ICJ case and ICAO case so far. That I can explain if you have any question. Thank you.
Merci, Hamid John. Parastu John, do you want to talk a little bit about trying to get accountability or justice for your parents inside the court system and the judiciary of Iran? فکر کنم فهمیدی چی گفتم. I don't need to. Yeah, merci.
ببین به هر صورت مسئله سر اینه که وقتی که چنین فاجعه‌ای اتفاق میفته، شما به عنوان بازمانده راه‌های مختلفی رو نه فقط بایستی بری، بلکه بایستی حتی سعی کنی پیدا کنی برای اینکه به طرف مقابل که در واقع یک سیستم حکومتیه که همه مسلماً میدونی که قرار نیست عدالت رو اجرا بکنه، ولی وظیفش اینه که بکنه. پس بنابراین هی دائم بهش فشار میاری و هی دائم افشاگری میکنی که این وظیفته ولی انجام ندادی، این رو باید بکنی، حق ماست ولی نمی کنی. یک جور به صورت دائم پرسشگری و خواستن همین خودش باعث میشه که یک فضای در واقع اکتیویستی گرد یک مسئله پدید بیاد و یه همدستی اجتماعی پدید. اون بخشی که برای من خیلی مهمه. مسئله صرفاً درسته که مسلمه که من به عنوان فرزند 2 نفر این کارو میکنم، ولی اونها هم قربانی یک شرایطی شدند که بسیاری کسای دیگه همون سرگذشت رو پیدا کردن. این سرگذشت ها از هم جدا نیست، پس دادخواهیشون هم جدا نیست و این باعث میشه که یک نیروی اجتماعی شکل بگیره، نیرویی که میخواد پاسخ بگیره از حکومت. این پاسخ گرفتن رو ما همه راههایی رو که میتونستیم رفتیم و درسته که میدونستیم که به نتیجه نمیرسه، ولی رفتن اون راه ها بسیار مهم بوده برای اینکه هم رسوا بکنی اون حکومت رو که وظیفه‌شو انجام نمیده و هم اینکه همدستان و همراهانی پیدا بکنی که در واقع اونها هم همون خواسته رو داشته باشن. این یک چالش جمعیه، فقط به عهده ما بازماندگان نیست.
Samira Jan, you're muted.
You're mute,
Sorry.
Sorry. Rough translation here. Parastu says that when such a horrific crime occurs, you have to find a path because you know that within such a system, you will never actually get full justice for your loved ones. But you have to decide to become a consistent thorn in the side of the judiciary. And it itself can become a movement for social and political justice, demanding answers because the killing of my parents was not an isolated issue. Many people were killed alongside my parents. And that this issue itself, although not isolated, can, when people come together and join hands, become a social movement inside, demanding justice. I'm just going to go to the next question here. So we have a question, and that is, given the rising number in executions in Iran, and as Canada continues to lead the UN General Assembly resolution on Iran's human rights situation, I'm wondering if Canada can further strengthen its efforts through its international coalitions and work at the UN to help stop these executions. Hillary, do you want to take that one on?
Yeah, I mean, Canada has for years led on that particular resolution within the UN bodies. The numbers over the years, it's not that they're getting better, they're actually getting closer, which I think sort of represents some of the challenges of the UN human rights system. I mean, we certainly hope that the incoming government is a stronger voice on human rights, whether it's Iran or any number of countries, but those voices have to be very loud. And, you know, I think there is a certain level of cynicism around what the UN system can achieve. And I hope we don't give into it. It's, you know, states do care what is being said about them, you know, including Iran. They may give the impression that they don't, but they certainly do. And we want Canada to be that strong voice, and it does make a difference. I think what has been illustrated by everyone on the panel is that the impunity that takes place is extraordinary. The systems within Iran itself are not strong, which means you need to have the international systems to be stronger to compensate. And we certainly hope Canada continues to lead, not just on this specific issue, but more broadly as well. These are states who believe they are justified in flouting international human rights norms. As you mentioned earlier, the extraterritorial reach of security services, whether it's Iran, the former Syrian government. We talk about sort of transnational repression a lot in Canada. There are many states reaching beyond their borders to commit targeted assassinations, political murder, whatever terms we want to use. They are human rights violations, and governments need to speak up more. I think we get this sense that people are very concerned about the diplomatic relations, so it becomes quite quiet. But that in itself is a huge problem. Those voices need to be loud.
I think you said Hamid, but you were muted.
Hamid John, I'm wondering if you can just pick up off where Hillary was speaking about the sort of diplomatic relations almost getting in the way of trying to get justice. I think you would be very well positioned to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I can give you an example. Like it goes back to 2 months ago. So there was a meeting at ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, and Iran had questioned the jurisdiction of ICAO Council. So ICAO Council has 36 members, and two of the the plaintiffs were Canada and the UK, so they couldn't vote. So there were like 34 countries that they could vote about a sensitive case like PS752. If I ask you, all people here in this meeting, you will vote in favor of the families of the victims. You would say, we need to know the truth. But imagine, out of that 34 countries, 4 voted negative and 8 were absentees. So we had to pass the number of 19. And fortunately, with the effort of the governments and, the diplomatic relationship and all of that, we got 21. So, and that was a secret ballot. So imagine if it was not like that. So probably some other countries would not vote in favor of Canada and the 3 other affected countries. So there is, as I said, geopolitical alliance building here, and like some other countries, they get involved in a crime against humanity and they vote in favor of crime against humanity without people knowing, or even their people knowing that they're doing that. So we have the same problem with probably in International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice, and other international bodies that they have to stand at the side of the victims. I don't mean that they don't do that, but that's a lot of work and that's a lot of effort in place to make this happen. Like, again, about PS752, Canada had a difficult job to bring other countries together. UK, Ukraine, Sweden, they have different relationship with the Islamic regime. Like from the first days, for example, we heard from the UK that we want to save our traditional relationship with the Islamic regime in Iran. So in this condition, so those British families, they had a very difficult job to convince their own government to pursue justice for the victims. So, and that's the country that lost 4 citizens. So Ukraine lost 11, Sweden lost 17. But for Canada, I'm very happy that Canada led the case in ICJ and in ICAO, but I don't know, probably it didn't work for International Criminal Court. We want, we have some ideals for ourselves. We want to go to International Criminal Court and have arrest warrants for the leaders of the Islamic regime. But, you can't be always successful to get what you want. And as Hillary explained, there are a lot of obstacles on the way.
Thank you so much. Kati John, if I could ask you to read this next question. It's from Aryanpur, and then I will translate it into English after. And this is for you, Parastu John, if you could listen to this question in Persian.
در جهانی که روز به روز قطبی تر می شود و در آن هر دو سوی افراطی چه راستگرا و چه چپگرا اغلب بی‌توجهی به حقوق بنیادین و حقوق بشر نشان می دهند، حالی که میانه روها از هر دو سو مورد حمله و بدنامی قرار می گیرند و پایبند به اخلاق و پایبندی به اخلاق نقش سازنده‌ای می‌توانند دیفا کنند تا از عدالت دفاع کنند، با اعدام‌ها مخالفت کنند و از حقوق بشر در رژیم‌های اقتدارگرایی مانند جمهوری اسلامی حمایت کنند. آنها چگونه می‌توانند به طور مؤثر در برابر این فشار دوگانه مقاومت کنند و در عین حال اعتبار و اثرگذاری خود را حفظ نمایند؟
So I'll just read out the question in English. In an increasingly polarized world where both right-wing and left-wing extremes often show disregard for fundamental human rights, and where moderates are vilified from both sides, what constructive role can principled actors play to defend justice, oppose executions, and uphold human rights in authoritarian contexts like the Islamic Republic? How can they effectively navigate and resist this dual pressure while maintaining credibility and impact? Parastu John, if we could start with you, and then we'll go to our other panelists.
این سوالیه که من به شدت باهاش درگیرم، یعنی در واقع بغرنج بودن شرایط رو خیلی خوب درش توضیح میده، برای اینکه ما انگار که هیچ زمینی نیست که روش وایسی و فکر کنی که اینجا در واقع یه جوری جای درستیه برای ایستادن. به صورت دائم بایستی ببینی که تو رو در چه کنتکستی دارن قرار میدن و چطور داره از اون خواسته‌ای که داری در واقع سوء استفاده میشه برای پیشبرد یک سری سیاست‌هایی که تو باهاش موافق نیستی اصلا. این یک معضل اساسیه و همونطور که دوستمون نوشته این به شدت هم گسترش پیدا کرده در دنیای امروز ما. و یه مشکل دیگه‌ای که برای یه فردی مثل من پدید میاره اینه که بسیار وسواسین میکنه. دائم بایستی فکر کنم که نه خب درست نیست، این درست نیست، اون درست نیست. یعنی دائم بایستی بیشتر از گذشته سعی کنی کنتکست ها رو بشناسی تا مبادا اون تلاشی که داری میکنی برای یک دستیابی به یک خواسته درست در جایی قرار بگیره که دیگرانی ازش سوء استفاده کنن که در واقع خواسته درستی ندارن، فقط به یه شکلی دارن بسیج میکنن به یه سمتی. این من تنها چاره‌ای که براش میشناسم و گفتم این سوالیه که بسیار مهمه و خود من دائم باهاش روبرو هستم، با کسانی که باشون در ارتباطم به صورت دائم، اونها هم همین چالش رو دارن و فکر میکنم دقیق نگاه کردن و از هیجاناتش این فضاهای مختلف کمی در واقع خود رو در امان داشتن اندکی میتونه کمک بکنه. ولی من فکر میکنم که دنیای ما به این سمتی که داره میره خیلی به ما کمک نمیکنه برای اینکه موقعیت درستی بتونیم پیدا بکنیم. ولی خب تلاشمون رو هم میکنیم.
So I'll just roughly translate Parastu's answer here. Her response is, this is a question for the ages and one that I grapple with often myself, because it really feels like those of us in the middle have no place to stand. And at times it feels like what we are fighting for is being taken advantage by people whose politics and motives and end game don't align with us at all. You don't want to be used on these paths, and it can be isolating and exhausting. But I feel that context is the most important thing, and finding a community of like-minded individuals. But unfortunately, the world that we find ourselves in right now isn't aligning with what we want to see. However, I still remain hopeful, and I will still keep fighting. Hamid or Hillary, do you want to take on this question of credibility and remaining in the
Sure.
middle?
I go after Hillary. Hillary, go, please.
Yeah, it reminds me that I used to have a T-shirt that said on one side it said human rights extremist, and on the other side it said defending unpopular causes since 1961, which was the founding of Amnesty. And you know that came out of very much war on terror work, and I think what we always have to do is name things as the human rights violations that they are. I mean, sometimes things are very sort of behind the scenes and shrouded in secrecy. And other times governments freely, or armed groups freely admit that they're committing human rights violations because they believe there is a toleration for them because it serves their agenda. And that happens sort of all across the political spectrum. But for the human rights community and those that we stand with, we have to continually say, no, these are all human rights violations. Their popularity in certain contexts doesn't justify them. And it's really quite striking that, so many people cheered something like a targeted killing because it was of the person who was the bad guy, and the idea, they expressed just so much cynicism about, oh, you could never bring these people to justice, as if these systems magically disappear in those moments, and I think our role is to continually remind people that no, they don't. You have to keep trying. It's like the times where people would say, that certain societies weren't ready for democracy yet. It's like, what is driving a commentary like that is sort of racism, among other things, but sort of agendas to keep people from realizing their rights. And yeah, we have to, regardless of where it's happening, regardless of the circumstances, we have to continue to name things for the human rights violations they are, and not let this sort of contextualization within ideology, it sort of comes back to that argument, win the day. I mean, we're seeing this trend towards authoritarianism very close to home, and we need to name it as such.
Hamid, would you like to take that?
Yeah, just very, very quickly. It's a difficult question, but and everybody has his own answer or her own answer about this. But I have to borrow a quote from Immanuel Kant that I usually use, that two things awe me most: the starry sky above me and the moral law within me. So if I say it in Farsi, دو چیز همیشه مرا به شگفتی وامی دارد: آسمان پرستاره بالای سرم و حکم اخلاقی درونم. In the last 5 years and in my whole life, I've tried to stand for my principles, the principles that I think they're moral principles. And I follow that. I have no recommendation for anybody else, but this is what I do.
Thank you so much. There's another question here from Farhad Sufi, member of Amnesty International for the past 50 years in Canada. In the past 10 to 15 years, I can see many of these people who are affiliated with the regime in Iran and themselves abusers of human rights in different capacities are coming to Canada. I believe Amnesty Canada could take action to expose them and work with the government in Canada. Hillary, do you want to take this on? Is that something that Amnesty even does?
Well, it's complicated. The Canadian government can exercise what's known as universal jurisdiction to investigate and organize a trial of an individual who's in Canada for violations that have taken place outside Canada, but they rarely do it. They cite costs, complexities of trials, trying to get witnesses in Canada, although now technology certainly enables that. But so it's very rarely happened. And so often the government will use other measures. I mean, there's a lot of sanctions on Iran, as we've mentioned before, and some of those are travel sanctions and so on. The thing about naming names is, for a human rights organization, is you need to have that kind of airtight research that links people to human rights violations. It's certainly possible. We've named a lot of names in the context of Iran in our reports over the years, quite unusually. And so I think it's what action we would take. I'm not sure right now, but part of that is getting access to the information. So I would suggest if someone has that information to share it. I think the Canadian government is aware that people, when they're filling out visa applications or other kinds of immigration applications, they lie on those. And how to do the proper screening is always a challenge. But yeah, we need to keep sort of turning the information around. So yeah, it's like, I'm not quite sure what we could do, but we need the sort of information and investigation to start with. Yeah. I think we're very unlikely to see trials here. Yeah, very unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, the Canada Border Services Agency is the body that is mostly responsible for this.
Yes.
And I do know myself, I have sat in on a couple of immigration reviews by the courts, and people have been, and I'm talking about people affiliated with the Iranian government, have been deported since Canada enacted a bunch of these laws in 2023, 2022, referring to the IRGC. But again, this is two-pronged, because you're also seeing people, because of America's designation, there are Iranian Canadians now, being turned away from the border while they try to go to America. Their work visas are being revoked, etc.
Yeah, I think what's important in all of this is due process. So, whether we're talking about what's happening in the States or immigration proceedings in Canada, it all has to go through due process that can take time. But it's an important principle. Yeah.
There are 2 or 3 questions here within the Q&A, which have already been answered. Farid Khodadi, I think we just spoke to the question that you had about safe haven for people affiliated with the Iranian government. There was another question also from Mitra that has a little bit to do that. I just wanted to allow the panelists in the last 5 minutes that we have, if they'd like, Parastu, also for yourself, ye jambandi, if you'd like to give some closing remarks, whatever you'd like to, in reference to political violence and the death penalty, the associations between these two. Whoever would like can start.
شاید من بتونم شروع کنم. به نظرم خیلی مهمه که ما این تلاش برای دستیابی به دموکراسی رو در واقع بدونیم که آنچه که الان بهش خودمون رو پایبند میکنیم در راه این تلاش اینه که شکل خواهد داد به آینده. بنابراین مهمه که ما در مبارزمون برای در واقع بر ضد ظلم، بر ضد یک سیستم خشونتگرا، بر ضد یک بی‌عدالتی حواسمون باشه که چه معیارهایی رو برای این کار همین الان در واقع بین خودمون جا میندازیم، چه فرهنگی رو سعی میکنیم که در بین کنشگران و در جامعه جا بندازیم. به ویژه برای ما کسانی که عزیزانمون رو از دست دادیم، همونطور که حامد گفت، اشاره کرد، بسیار مهمه که حواسمون به این باشه که احساساتمون نبایستی ما رو به سمت انتقام جویی سوق بده. بایستی یک سری مبانی رو در واقع قراردادهایی رو با خودمون بذاریم و به اونها پایبند بمونیم تا بتونیم آینده‌ای بسازیم که دوباره دچار این چرخه خشونت نشه. من میخوام یک چیز دیگه هم به این اضافه کنم اگر بشه. حدود فکر میکنم 2-3 سال پیش حامد عزیز هم یکی از کسانی بود که این متن رو امضا کرد، یک متنی از سوی خانواده هایی که در ما بهشون میگیم خانواده های دادخواه، به هر صورت در آمد پیمان دادخواهی. این پیمان دادخواهی که در واقع با نگاه به تجربه تاریخی بعد از انقلاب میگه که ما بایستی فردا رو به دور از خشونت با حفظ تمام موازین حقوق بشر سعی کنیم که بسازیم و اولین در واقع بند این پیمان مخالفت با مجازات اعدامه که ما برای فردای ایران برای هیچ کس اعدام نمیخوایم، حتی اگر کسانی باشند که عزیزان ما رو از بین بردن. بایستی ما جلوی این خشونت بیستیم به این امید که دیگه کسانی مثل سرگذشت‌هایی مثل من یا حامد رو تجربه نکنن. به نظرم باید این رو از حالا شروع کرد، فرهنگش رو از حالا جا انداخت، وگرنه روند دموکراتیک، هر دموکراسی صرفاً با پیگیری روندهای دموکراتیکه که به دست میاد. بنابراین الان مهمه به همون اندازه که اون آینده. مرسی.
Okay, I'm going to roughly translate that. It is very important that we tie to democracy and the path we take towards democracy and our behavior and tactics on that path, because it will define our future society. For those of us who have had our loved ones killed as a result of political violence, we must not allow our emotions to dictate or allow revenge to be what we seek. We must break this cycle of violence. 2 to 3 years ago, Hamed signed a statement, really, of the families who are seeking justice for their loved ones. And in that statement, we said that we must see our tomorrow built without political violence enacted. The most important part of that is to not have the death penalty be a part of that justice seeking. And we must start that path now. Otherwise, we will continue this path of political violence. And as family members who are seeking justice, we can't allow that the family members of other people to experience what Hamid and I experienced on that path. Okay. Hamid or Hillary, do you want to give us some closing statements for today?
I think we lost Hillary.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't see her anymore.
I'm
okay,
here.
maybe
I
they
just
will
can't
come
turn
back.
Okay.
I'm here. I just can't turn my camera on. Sorry.
Okay, Hillary, yeah, that's fine. It's more important to hear you than see you, really.
Yeah, I think what Parasu said, I think is very important. You know, when we're building our futures, it has to be on a foundation of human rights. If we're talking about security, it has to be genuine security for everyone. And, you know, that can't be sort of built on the death penalty or on these other systems of whereby the state very intentionally targets people and kills them. And I think the part of the point I was trying to make in my overview is, you know, what's sort of further, I mean, to have the kind of machinery of death that is the death penalty is sort of deeply damaging to societies. This sort of broader net of political violence is one in which, you know, the net casts wider and wider in terms of who ends up being targeted intentionally or unintentionally. And, you know, we have to continue to fight back against that because it is meant to stop change from taking place in society. It's meant to undo attempts at justice by targeting the people who are standing with the intended target, whether it's relatives that are fighting for justice or the lawyers working with them or the broader communities that are standing in solidarity. And we always need to stand with them as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Hillary. Hamid John, do you want to give us some closing remarks? Although I
Yeah.
love Emmanuel Kant quote.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, no quote anymore. But first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And, you know, it was very nice seeing you, Hillary and Parasu, of course. But, you know, I've talked to several people in the last 5 years that they're seeking justice for their families or for their loved ones. Not only in PS752 families, the families of 1980s, families of political assassinations, families of terrorists, families of bombings, you know, even families of non-Iranians who have been victim of the Islamic regime. And I can't say that there is a consensus or there is a census among all the families about the abolition of the death penalty. Everybody has his own opinion, and you know they are entitled to have their own opinion because of the pain and suffering they have gone through. But having said that, I think the families of the victims, they play a big role in abolition of death penalty in future Iran. I mean, we need very strong voices to support abolition of the death penalty in future. And I think if the families of the victims are leading that kind of action, I hope that we would be successful. But I think this should not be fallen in the hands of negotiators or like behind the door conversations and negotiations, because if the families of the victims are not involved, the outcome of that would not be very successful for Iran and for the future Iran. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hamid. I think it's important what you said, that the families should be centered in any future decision making in that respect. Parastu John, thank you so much for joining us from Germany. Hamid John, thank you so much. Hillary, thank you so much. And I just want to note that our next session is on June 14th, and we will be looking at the role of religion, and specifically Islam, in political violence. So we hope that you can join us again for that. Thank you to all of the people online who joined us today. And we hope to see you at the next session on June 14th. Take care.
ممنون.